I request a confirmation that the constituents of the audience that are currently experiencing the early stages of their biogerontological development, to whom I wish to refer using a word representing the grammatical second-person nominative plural in the English manifestation of the linguistic constructs associated with it, but cannot due to such a word being homonymous with the word representing the grammatical second-person nominative singular, which therefore forces me to make use of a colloquial or dialectal form of the meaning, are, indeed, psychologically, physiologically, socially, and situationally well equipped for the introduction of an activity, action, or situation into their direct focus in the near future, namely, in the next few minutes. The repetition of an oral utterance colloquially utilized in informal linguistic registers in order to communicate an expression of assent, affirmation, or agreement, in this case a confirmation in response to a particular request made in the very near past, via a carefully and consciously modulated pattern of mechanical longitudinal waves propagating through the atmosphere using the nearby molecular composition thereof as a medium to traverse through, that mainly consists of a set of non-turbulent phonemic articulations composed of, in their respective temporal order, an open front and rounded vowel and a close near front and rounded vowel joined together by a glide, twice, followed by the word captain, hereby and henceforth in reference to the agent of speech that has previously and recently expressed a request of the confirmation preceding this final utterance, an expression which, indeed, prompted the creation of a causal chain which resulted in the group of utterances currently being articulated. Although I, in fact, am able to receive and accurately parse the sound waves resulting from the previously and recently articulated utterances, this fact is implied by sociolinguistic, contextual, and situational clues. Therefore, despite my state of being fully cognizant and aware of the prompted utterances and their meaning, I hereby make the claim that I cannot and did not hear the recent utterances of confirmation, the direct purpose and intent of this exercise being to cause the biogerontologically underdeveloped audience to repeat its articulations of confirmation in a manner that causes the resultant atmospheric compression waves to have a greater amplitude and peak pressure than the iteration that preceded the exclamation that is meant to prompt the utterance currently undergoing a description of high verbosity. As explained in detail shortly earlier, the exclamatory repetition of the previous utterances had indicated confirmation, yet in a greater sonic amplitude than the previous iteration. This is despite the fact that we already are fully cognizant and aware that Captain was fully capable of receiving and accurately parsing our previous utterances that we have now repeated. However, we also know the intentions of the Captain making such a false claim due to the current context. We, therefore, repeated our utterances with a measurably higher sonic amplitude in order to conform to the ordered sequence of events that is predestined to occur within the current situation by the creative agent that drafted the current sequence. The non-turbulent articulation of a close mid-back rounded lingual position which is unique due to being able to be characterized by an extremely high vowel quantity. This utterance is indicative of the commencement of the instrumental component of the current sequence and a transition into a mode of inflection that reflects lyrical properties and conforms to the cadence and rhythm of said instrumental component. I do, indeed, generate a query for the identification of that which assumes residence within an instance of a coalescence of berries produced by the tropical plant identified as Ananas comosus within the current scientific system of botanical taxonomic nomenclature. The location thereof being submerged in seawater, especially far enough below the water's surface so as to reside on and be in contact with the surface of the sea floor. In particular, the location of said coalescence of berries should be in relatively close proximity to Bikini Atoll, hence the name of the sea floor in this region is called Bikini Bottom. Bikini Atoll is an atoll that is a member of the Marshall Islands, officially deemed the Republic of the Marshall Islands. This island country is part of the larger island group of Micronesia and shares maritime boundaries with the Federated States of Micronesia, Wake Island, Kiribati, and Nauru. Bikini Atoll is commonly known to be an American nuclear test site, and it is located about 11.5 degrees north of the equator and 163.3 degrees east of the prime meridian. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Porifera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a subabdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. using an atypical but grammatical sentence structure that features a copular verb linking a subject with a set of adjectives, but with the subject being placed at the end reflecting an ovus sentence structure, I declare the fact that a masculine third-person singular subject, in reference to an anthropomorphic member of the phylum Pariphera identified shortly earlier, may be characterized as being especially permeable and thus able to soak and loosely contain liquid easily, having a tendency to scatter diffuse electromagnetic radiation of frequencies between 510 trillion and 540 trillion Hz, and absorb incoming electromagnetic radiation that lies outside of said frequency range, and exhibiting an exceptional numerosity of surface pores. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Pariphera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a subabdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. Now exhibiting archaic English grammatical structure by use of the now rarely utilized subjunctive mood form of a copular verb, I begin a conditional proposition by first presenting the conditional expression, that being whether my audience exhibits the desire to witness and or experience humor derived from situations of an atypically high level of contextual decoherence of or relating to oceanic navigation and maritime. For clarification, my audience mostly consists of humans currently experiencing the early stages of their biogerontological development. However, this television program regularly contains numerous adult jokes, hence I also have a relatively large adult audience. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Pariphera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a subabdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. Should the case be that my previously articulated conditional is sufficiently true, I express using the grammatical mood of imperativity that I shall will whoever met the appropriate condition to relocate his or her, hereby and henceforth meant to refer to biological sex, a clarification that may be necessary to reduce the degree to which the activation of an episode of self-proclaimed post-traumatic stress disorder within an individual commonly referred to by the derogatory term feminazi, center of gravity to some point in space such that the horizontal component of its displacement from the point contained by their bodies that is closest to the center of the Earth is sufficiently large to invoke a causal chain that includes the facilitation of the Earth to do a humanly measurable quantity of work on his or her body via the modification of the metric tensors of the geometry of the macroscopically pseudo-Riemannian points in space-time that surround said body and results in the longest line segment between any 2 points within said body being parallel to and sufficiently close to the contextually definite structure of planks extending across the approximately horizontal surface of the ship thereof furthest away from the center of the Earth such that the normal force imparted upon said body by the said structure of planks is approximately equal in magnitude to the integral of the gravitational constant times the quotient of the density of said body at some variable point in space times the mass of the Earth and the square of the distance between the center of mass of the Earth and the said variable point in space with respect to said variable point in space in the form of an infinitesimal quantity of volume, then to carry out a specialized action referred to by the colloquial linguistic atom flop in the manner that a member of a paraphyletic group of organisms that consist of all gill-bearing aquatic animals that lack limbs with digits but have a cavity within the head formed by a structure composed of either hard bone or cartilage would do so, that is, to violently flail about segments of the body in relation to each other, but with a constraint that specifies that both legs be kept in direct physical contact, as well as both arms with the hips and torso, physical contact being a further clarification needed to lift the physical ambiguity of the term, that at least 1 million atoms from each of the two linguistically invoked physical objects that are strongly coherent with the other atoms within their respective said objects are sufficiently close enough such that for each atom chosen from the set associated with one object there is a corresponding atom within the set associated with the other object such that the two said atoms are close enough to each other such that the Pauli exclusion principle forbids the two atoms to move another 10 picometers without a force that is orders of magnitude stronger than the forces humans are able to directly achieve. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Pariphera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a sub-abdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. I again request a confirmation that the audience is, indeed, psychologically, physiologically, socially, and situationally well equipped for the introduction of an activity, action, or situation into their direct focus in the near future, namely, in the next few seconds. However, this time I omit the subject and the copular verb, leaving only the appropriate adjective. In this case, the activity that I will now shortly introduce is the synchronized recitation and repetition of the identity of that which assumes residence within an instance of a coalescence of berries produced by the tropical plant identified as Ananas comosus within the current scientific system of botanical taxonomic nomenclature, the location thereof being submerged in sea water. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Pyrifera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a sub-abdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Pyrifera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a sub-abdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Pyrifera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a sub-abdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. An anthropomorphic and personified member of the phylum Pyrifera that, contrary to natural sponges, is in the shape of a rectangular prism like a synthetic or artificial fiber sponge would be, and wears a sub-abdominal item of clothing that assumes the approximate shape and resemblance of a rectangular prism, whose name is Robert but commonly and almost exclusively is shortened to Bob. Indeed, I must express my enjoyment in the current situation with an exclamatory utterance that almost universally carries such a meaning. This expression of enjoyment is referred to as laughter. The study and investigation of laughter is called glottology. Although still an ongoing scientific investigation, there are several theories on the origin and rationale behind laughter. One theory proposes that laughter is an evolved trait that was used as an early imprecise protocol for communication millions of years before proper language was developed. This theory claims that laughter is not a learned behavior, but is an inherent genetic trait. Also, laughter is a subconscious protocol for communication, like body language and facial expressions. Laughter also exhibits contagiousness. This theory states that the purpose of laughter is to invoke positive emotions and a sense of group unity within those surrounding the person undergoing a laughing episode. Hence, according to this theory, I am not laughing as an expression of enjoyment, but rather as an expression of togetherness and cohesion, and to invoke in the viewer positive vibes. However, there are many other theories that provide different interpretations of laughter, so there is not yet a definite way to explain laughter.